So I pray that as he speaks today, Lord, that your Holy Spirit speaks through him and lands on our hearts, oh God.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. It's always nice to actually see the front of your guys' heads. Since I'm only in the back, I get to now I get to stare at my dad's balding head, which is always nice. Now that he lives here, welcome, Dad. Yeah. I'm not picking on Chelsea. I told Jesse I'm not picking on Chelsea anymore. I'll pick on my dad from now on. So, I wanted to start this morning with just a quick story, then we'll get back to it. I know there's a lot of new people here. I am a pilot, and I'm talking about that a lot today. I normally don't, but I am. But I just want to tell a quick story. When I was still younger, see, I am young, Jessie. She tells me I'm old. But when I was younger and still building flight hours, at one time there was a small aircraft, four-seater single engine that was in New Jersey, and this man was paying me to fly it back down here to Florida. So I'd flown up there commercially and everything, and I get there, and when I arrived, one of the things I'd always done whenever I did these trips was I told whoever was selling it, look, before I'm going to fly all the way out here and pick up a plane you're trying to sell, I want you to take it out and fly it the day before, or a week before, or something, make sure everything's working. That way I don't come up here for nothing, and find out there's some serious issues. So the man had done that, and after his flight the night before, he left the master switch on, which drained the battery. So when I show up the next morning, we're starting to go through the paperwork, and then I go out to the aircraft. Actually, when I showed up, they had the battery on a charger. And I'm like, okay. And then he said, what he had done, which normally fine. If you kill a battery, normally you let it charge for a while, and it's fine. So we have to go through all sorts of paperwork anyways to complete the bill of sale, and I have to make sure this aircraft is, airworthy to fly paperwork-wise and all that. So we start going through, and of all the pieces of paper on board that aircraft that matter, the most important one is not there. And they swear it's there, and they just had an inspection like the week before, and that's the first thing on the inspection is to check and make sure that piece of paper is there. It's the first list, airworthiness certificate, first item. And it's not there. So I'm like, hey guys, it's not here. So after, an hour of searching for the plane, the maintenance logbooks, this, that, the guy starts going through all these other avenues, and the short story is 4 hours later, he gets me that piece of paper. So by this point, I'm like, okay, look, that battery's been on the charger for at least 6 hours now. It's probably fine. It should be fine to start. So we go to crank it, and it turns, but it won't catch. It just doesn't have the juice to. So we're trying this, and, we're trying different techniques to start it and everything, and it's just not starting. And so we start going through, well, do you have any extra batteries around? Do you have a ground power cart? No, they've got nothing. We're in Podunkville, in the middle of nowhere. It was from Newark, it's an hour bus ride out to this place. It was up kind of in the boonies. So they don't have anything. So finally, we've gone through all this stuff, and I'm at the aircraft by myself. The mechanics, he's gone to do something else, and I'm looking at it, and finally I just reach over, and I put my hand on the aircraft cowling, and I pray over that engine, and I hop in, and the engine starts. And I'm like, sweet, thank you, Jesus. So I was pretty happy about that. So, now I'm sitting in the plane when it's running, but it's still chocked and everything, so I can't get out now, so I gotta get their attention. They unchock me, and I start taxiing towards the runway, and then in aircraft, you have a different brake system for the left side and the right side, and taxiing out to the runway, the left brake fails completely, which led to my dad naming that plane, the plane that wouldn't start, and the plane that wouldn't stop. So that was a fun trip. Stretches your abilities trying to plan through all that. So I told you that story for a reason. There is a point to it, but I am going to come back to that in a little while. I do want to take a second and just thank Rod and Val and the rest of the leadership team. I'm sure they're watching. That's why I'm looking at the phone. I hope they're not watching. For those of you who don't know, Val's sister, who is more than a sister to her, if that can even be possible, just passed away from cancer after a long battle. They're back in South Africa to be with their family. So I'm hoping they're not watching, and that they're spending the time with their family, and they're able to just, mourn together and just relax as a family. All right, so before I jump into this, I want to pray. Father, we thank you so much. Father, thank you for your love. Thank you that the cross is behind us, and you have this whole life before us. We thank you for how you come and you meet us where we are, and you just take us from there. You don't want anything else from us except our hearts. You just want us to love you the way you love us. And we thank you for that.
Thank you, Lord.
Amen. So I'm just going to kind of talk about something that it's been in my heart for a little while, and Rod asked me to prepare, and I still wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about it because it is a little bit of a nerdy topic. Jeremy can relate. He's already excited. Sorry, Chelsea. I really try to not talk about aviation when I'm up here, but like I couldn't not talk about it. I mean, it's like God gave me this massive download actually while Maria was preaching like a month ago. And it was just kind of like, this is what you're going to talk about. He's the king, so that kind of settled it. So here I am. I try not to do it, but I am. So I've titled this, The Parable of the CDI, and I will explain what that means later. I'm kind of going to take things in layers, and I'm kind of going to give you little bits of information, and then Steve will understand this. So I'm going to say, now hold that thought, and then I'll come back to it. So you kind of have to keep up and pay attention here. Now, I will tell you more about it later, but a CDI is actually a piece of navigation equipment in our aircraft, and I'm going to use its principles to illustrate some of Christ's principles. So with that in mind, I'm going to kind of switch, and I want to talk about what's known as bearings and radials. Anybody ever heard those words? Maybe, I'm sure. So essentially, a bearing or a radial is a straight line in relation to a fix. And the best way I can explain this is there's a pier right over there. If you're visiting, there's a pier right here on the beach, and there's a beach road, A1A, that runs north and south. And if you could imagine that road being perfectly straight, which it's not, but you could say that if you wanted to say that the pier was the fix, as in like the reference point, then you can be on that road and you can be heading towards the pier or away from the pier. You could be north of the pier and heading towards the pier, but you could also be north of the pier and heading away from the pier, right? So, essentially, a bearing or a radial is just a line. You can kind of think of it just like A1A. It's just a road, and a fix is just a specific point along that. Think of the pier. Just think of, am I north of the pier or south of the pier? It's kind of the simplest way to think about it. Now, bearings, so there's bearings and radials. They're part of the same line. The only difference is that a bearing is always referring to that fix, and a radial is always referring as from that fix. So if I'm driving and I'm down by AJ's house, who lives way that way, south of the pier, and I wanted to go to the pier, I would say I was on the bearing to the pier. But if I was down by his south and I wanted to keep heading south towards Miami, I would say I'm going to pick up the radial from the pier and keep going south. Even though I'm in the same place on the earth, I'm at his house, it's all in relation to this fix. So remember the to and from, because a lot of this kind of actually wraps into that idea. So I might be quizzing you on that later. So bearings are to and radials are from. So if you could go to the next slide, actually. So this is an approach into Daytona that they're getting rid of. But I liked it because it was simple. It didn't have a lot of information. And essentially, this right here is the line. The road, if you want to call it. This is Ormond. There's a navigational facility there. And that can be the pier. That's our fix. And then you can see if you were going this way, you'd fly 336 degrees, and going that way, the reciprocal, which is 156. And, you can be here, and I can, if I wanted to go to the fix, I'll be going on the bearing to. If I was here and going away, I'll be on the radial from. So I'm not making it up. That's what we do. Yeah, or you just turn the autopilot on nowadays and just let it go. We like to hand fly. Now, in order to help us out, we have the little device in our aircraft that's called the CDI. What it allows us to do is we can actually pick a fix, like the Flagler Pier, and we can set in the desired line we want to fly. I can put in this line, or if I twisted it, I could fly this line. Jeremy, maybe you can show your muscles and do the dumb joke. But you can pick whichever radial you want, which actually is really helpful when you're trying to navigate. And that is actually what the CDI is, what I titled this, but we'll talk more about that later. Instead, I'm going to go back to and focus more on the bearings and radials individually. So if you want to talk about bearings, a common phrase that I would say most people know is, they say, man, I just got to get my bearings. You ever heard people say that? Mm-hmm. And they're normally saying that when they're referencing, like, if they're unsure of something or they're confused, or, they're just like, I got to figure out what's going on here. And it's really a necessary step, getting your bearing, before you can effectively move forward. I mean, you can always move forward. It may not be a very, I can set the wrong bearing and fly into a mountain, so you kind of have to do it effectively for it to work. And remember, bearings are? Two. Good. Better than my old students were already. So if we keep that in mind, when people say that, what they're actually saying is, man, in order to get my bearing, I must be going to something. Because if not, you haven't got your bearing. So that's something to remember. Now let's talk about the radials. Another common phrase for radials is you can say energy or light radiates from the sun. Or you can say beauty radiates from Jesse. And it does.
Nicely done.
How can I not? So,
brownie points.
Yeah. I keep telling people she hasn't killed me yet, so this marriage is going great. So remember, radials though are from. So if you wanted to radiate something, or a phrase that you could use to describe someone in a positive manner is, man, that person's just so radiant. If you want to radiate, or if you want to be radiant, you have to almost be moving from something. Like there must have been something behind you that allows you to radiate out from that point. Because if I'm going from something, that means there's something behind me. So you can almost liken it to a cause and an effect. There was a cause, something happened back here, and the effect is now I'm able to radiate from this. And you can, look at the sun. You can say there's all sorts of crazy gases and, things happen inside of the sun that I don't understand. That's the cause. The effect is we get this light and heat and energy that comes out and, hits the earth. So, it comes out from that. I could also liken it as, if it's the from, it's almost like, if you're going up a mountain and you finally crest that hill and now you start going down that hill, what's happening? You start building that speed, building that momentum, because now you're going from that hill. It's the from. Because something is behind me, now I can blank. So that's bearings. Now,
radio.
Good. Oh, my students love me. Oh yeah, they knew how to listen with me. So now let's talk about the CDI. If we could bring up the next slide. Does anybody know what it stands for in aviation? Margaret might know because her husband was an air traffic controller, but he probably didn't use it. Anybody? I was going to give you some candy or something.
Direction indicator.
Close. It actually stands for the course deviation indicator. Now, when they say deviation, they're not talking anything about being a deviant. It's just saying, like in aviation, it's a very cut and dry, very humorless thing. Sometimes it's, if you screwed up and they said fly heading 170 and you heard 270 and you flew the wrong heading, in the report, you wouldn't say I messed up. You would say I deviated from an air traffic control instruction. So that's all it's really talking about. But I decided to rename this for this sermon to the Christ direction indicator. I just feel like that, I don't know, I think that fits a little better for what we're trying to talk about. Now, how both of these things work is first you have to figure out, well, there's a whole lot of other steps, so I'm going to eliminate the really nerd part of it for your sakes. The first thing you have to do is you have to figure out the desired radial or bearing that you want. You have to set that in there, but then you have to get on it. It's just like, if we're here and we know we got to get on 995 to go to Jacksonville, first thing you have to do is what? Get to 95. It's not very helpful to have it set for 95 if we're on 100. It's not going to be as helpful. So when I think of bearings and radials, I just think of the line. So we have to get on the line, but then it's not enough just to get on the line. We have to stay on the line. Yeah. You can get 95, but if you just Maria's car actually will literally drive itself. And I tested that, and it's really cool. But most of us, we have to actively, make inputs to stay on the line. And what this instrument does is it has a little needle, and it swings back and forth to tell you which way you need to go. If the needle goes to the left, you need to go left. If it goes right, you need to go right. Because if you're in the clouds and you can't see outside, how else are you going to tell? So when the needle is centered, it means that you're actually on the line, but it only means you're on the line at that exact moment. And we'll come back to that. But that's all it means. It's not good just to go, we're on the line. There's more you have to pay attention to, and I'm going to pull all that back in a little while. So if you could pop up the next slide, you can see this is what it looks like, one of the ways it's displayed. So this one, they have 300, or it looks like 001 degrees. They're going to the station. The two flags lit up. If not, it'd be down for from. But that needle is centered. And then, so that means that at this point in time, they are on the line. On this one, though, they're not. They would actually have to, the needle is off to the left Just like the road, if the road's going that way, which way do you need to go?
That way.
That way. So you turn towards the needle. If you do it right. If you do it wrong, it's backwards, and that gets all sorts of bad real fast. So, yeah, that's how that works, the visual representation. And if you could pop up the next slide, I have two questions. It's the same thing. Ignore the horizontal line. That's for something different. So is this aircraft on the line?
Yes.
Yeah.
Will this aircraft stay on the line?
No.
You're all wrong. The answer is C. I know, I told you. My students didn't like me all the time. It's not enough information. All it tells you is that I'm on the line
No.
right now. You know, if the line is, you know, straight up and down, and I'm right here, that's great. But if I'm right here, but my nose is pointed that way, am I going to stay on that line? No. So it's not enough just to be on the line. I would see that students do all the time. You know, they have their scan, they're going, and the needle's centered, but their heading's like 20 degrees offset. And I'm sitting there, and I'm saying, this isn't going to last, you know, because they're flying. It's like, you know, you're on 95, and you just start drifting. You're on 95, but it's not going to work out very well if you don't make a correction. So, let's see, I said all that. And it's important to understand that because airplanes, just like humans with life, never stop moving. Life keeps going. So just because God has you or you're on God's line at this point in time, well, tomorrow's going to happen. And if you don't keep making adjustments, guess what? You're not going to stay on that line. You know, you kind of have to have your life's flight path, if I can use that word, lined up with God's desired course, or you're not going to stay on it. And I see this, I know, I feel like a lot of people have this, maybe more at teen camps, I don't know, maybe, you know, adults have it too, but they come and they have like this moment with God. And it's like everything's so clear, and you know, like God, it's like, okay, I know God's telling me I need to do these things, I need to stop doing these things, this is, you know, and look, God has me right where he wants me, and they come back and they're so excited, God has me right where he wants me, I know exactly what to do, I know what's going on, but then they don't change their life. God put them on the line right there, but then they didn't adjust their life or their flight path, whatever you want to call it, to stay on the line. And what happened? They were going this way, God put them on the line, and they just kept going that way. So you have to make sure you're going to stay on the line. So why is this all important? Well, I feel like, I don't, you know, at least as a believer, as a follower of Jesus, we want to do what God has planned. We want to radiate with like we're just like, you're in that sweet spot with God, and you're doing exactly what he wants you to do. You know, it's like you are right there. You know, I see that with people. You know, I see that. I feel like AJ Nestie's always in that sweet spot. Yeah. I feel like Amber's in that sweet spot right now when it comes to leading the worship. You know, Mike McDermott, if you know him, I feel like he's in that sweet spot. Yeah. You know, Jeremy talks about when he first came to Florida, I feel like that was kind of almost like that was when he crossed that fix, because he talks about how things just started to fall in place and things just came together, and he just knew that he was right where God wanted him to be. You know, it's like he got on that line and he started staying on that line. And all of a sudden you start becoming more effective in God's kingdom and in life. Mm-hmm. And you just start moving in those unforced rhythms of grace, you know, where it's not necessarily that it's always easy, but man, it's just, you know that it works and that God's there and that life is just good. But in order to do that, you have to get your bearings and you have to go to the fix. If you don't do that, you'll never be able to have the benefits of radiating, of that radiantness as you move past whatever it was that God had for you. Now, eventually, when you're flying from, like if we're using one of these things, well, they're stations on the ground, and just like a car radio when you're cruising on a long drive, you listen to the radio, what happens? You start losing reception, it gets staticky, and you have to find a new station. Well, we have the same problems, and we have to do things like that. And it kind of lines up with life, because things work in seasons. And, you know, God has plans for everybody, but in his mind, he's like, okay, I'm going to have them do this for this long, and now I need to kind of shift them to go here and go there. You know, it's not like just a straight, exact line that he puts you on. You always have to be aware that you have to turn if you want to stay on the right line. And, you see this where, it's kind of like you get on I-95 down to Miami to come here. You're like, okay, God or the GPS, kind of this example, told me, get on 95 and head north. So you're heading north. And now the GPS says, okay, take exit 284 for Route 100, /US this, /that, 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 as the GPSs always do. And it's like the person sitting there going, no, God told me to get on 95, so I'm just staying on 95. I mean, it sounds silly to think about it if you're driving and you're just going to blatantly ignore your GPS, but we do that with God all the time. Well, God told me to do this. Well, yes, but when's the last time you talked to him about that to make sure that this is still the thing that you need to be doing? You know, I try to do that with Randall. I train him to do soundboard, and he does it 3 out of 4 Sundays a month now. And every now and then I check in and be like, hey, man, you still feel like God wants you doing this 3 Sundays a month? Are you okay with that? Because he might say, you know I've been moved in and out of things before, just not just in church life, but just in life in general. And you have to be aware that things are gonna change. And when that happens, well, we have to get our bearing again, and we have to stop and say, look, we gotta figure this out. Which begs the question of, how do we get our bearings? I'm talking about getting our bearings, and I really don't think you have a CDI in your Bible, so you kind of have to figure it out some other way. Which, and then I feel like as a Christian, we normally kind of have 2 options. Well, there's prayer, and then there's God's Word. And which one is it?
Both.
Good. The answer is C, both. It's not either or. See, I'm telling you. Yeah, my students, they didn't like me necessarily during the course, but afterwards they always did. I only had one cuss me out. Yeah, that was fun. Because it really depends. It could be both. Sometimes it is one, sometimes it's the other. So the Bible very clearly says these things. The Bible doesn't say what to do when, you're up in New Jersey and your airplane won't start. You've tried everything else. If you can show me that scripture, that would be helpful. So I'm going to kind of talk now about the things that are not specifically addressed in the Word, because obviously the things that are addressed in the Word, well, you can read them. And to do that, I want to say, well, let's look at what Jesus did when he was faced with examples that weren't specifically addressed in the scriptures that he had available to him at the time. Because, he didn't have the Bible. He only had some of it. So I have 3 examples, and the first one is here in Luke 6, 12, and 13, and it's when Jesus was choosing his disciples. And earlier in the day, he had gone out, he had been at the synagogue, he had been teaching, he healed a man, and then that evening he goes out to pray. So people like Jessie are happy because that means you don't have to pray first thing in the morning. You can also pray at night because she's not a morning person. Don't talk to her in the mornings. She likes to pray at night. So if we could pull up that slide for Luke 6. Oh, sorry, she was bathrooming or something. I'm getting a look. It says, it was at this time that he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. And when the day came, he called his disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. So Jesus had a big decision to make. He's like, man, I got to choose, these apostles. And he knows that, man, these are going to be the closest ones. I need, good people. I need people I can trust. But more importantly than all that, I need the people to be the apostles that God wants to be the apostles. Because it's real easy for us to sit there and, he could have called a meeting with a couple of his closest 3 and said, hey, look, you guys are in. Let's figure out the other 9. He could have done something like that. And I'm not saying that stuff is wrong, but what was the first thing that he did?
Right.
He went and prayed. He prayed all night, which is good because that's a fairly large decision. So he had a big decision. He prayed first. He got his bearing. He said, all right, Father, I got to figure, give me a course or a bearing to take here. And then I think of, if the radial is the effect, think of the effect that decision had by choosing those 12. Think of what would have happened if he would have, what if he hadn't have chosen some of them? And he had people in there that weren't the best people, weren't the ones that God wanted. Christianity would have survived, but, it may not have... Think of the number of people that wouldn't have been reached. The ones that went to Asia. Maybe no one goes to Asia now. All sorts of things like that. We have no idea, but God does, and that's why it's important. Why it was important for Jesus that he got his bearing. The second thing is when Satan wanted to sift or attack Peter. This is here in Luke 22. And I can always picture, when we read the Bible, it's just like Simon, Simon, behold, Jesus has determined permission to, we kind of just read it through. I can always picture Jesus like, look, Simon. Like, look, man, behold. Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. But look, man, I have prayed for you, that your faith may not fail. and that you, once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. I mean, talk about life fitting. Picture for a second, your closest friend or relative or your spouse or your child, and picture that you just found out that Satan is demanding to attack them. Like, think about that. I mean, that's not a very peaceful time. You're like, oh yeah, it's cool. No, that's, when it's your close loved one like that, I mean, Satan is sitting there beating on heaven's door. Look, I want permission to attack this person. I want their head. Satan himself. That's not an easy thing. That's intense. So when the attack came, what did Jesus do? What does it say? Before he went to Simon or Peter, and before he came to us, like, look, man, Satan's coming to attack, man. We got to figure out a strategy. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. What did he do? He prayed. And then he went and told. Then he went and talked about it. First thing Jesus did, he got his bearing. And if the radial is the effect, think of the effect of Peter, surviving that attack. What if it would have broken his faith? What if, we can go through all the what ifs, but all I can say is that it was the most effective, way to spread the kingdom was for Peter to be strong. That's what God determined. That's the way he used him. And the last example is when Jesus raised a man from the dead. This whole story is in John 11. There's not a slide for the first part because it's a long story. So the backstory is essentially there is a dying man, and Jesus is far away from him, and he says, no, that guy's not going to die. He waits 2 days in this faraway place, and then he starts walking to the guy. It takes a long time to walk there, and the man dies while Jesus is still walking. And then when Jesus gets there, there's a whole lot of important things that aren't necessarily related to what I'm trying to pull out of it that happen. And what essentially happens is now Jesus is there. The man has been dead for 4 days, and everyone's kind of looking at him. And this is where I want to pick up in the scriptures with verse 40. Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, because of the people standing around I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me." So when Jesus needed a miracle, Jesus was the Son of God. He knew the Holy Spirit was upon him. He knew he can heal. He knew he can raise a man from the dead. But what did he do? He prayed first. He got his bearing. And then think of the radio, the effect of that. Think of just how that family was, having their loved one brought back to life and to get to spend however much more time with them on this. Think of the impact it had on those people because he prayed first. Oh, actually, I was going to skip that one. No, I did it anyways. So there's actually 4, and the last one was before his arrest. Jesus was about to face some really tough decisions because he kind of knew what was going to happen. He read the scriptures, he knew the prophecies, he knew what God had told him. And, he knew what was about to happen. And let's pick it up here in Matthew 26. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me." And he went a little beyond them and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." So during the toughest time that could have possibly happened to himself, what was the first thing Jesus did?
Prayed.
He went out and he prayed. He could have called the disciples together and sat them down and said, "Guys, this is going to happen." He could have, let me read the scriptures more and see if there's a way. He could have done all these other things, but instead he just went out and he got alone with God and he just prayed. And it said, he was grieved and he just prayed. He got his bearing. He knew, look, not as I will, but as you will. He got his bearing from God and said, look, okay, this is what I need to do. And then if you want to look at the cross as the fix, as we move beyond that fix, as all of creation moved beyond that point when Jesus died and was resurrected, think of the effect it's had on all creation. The restoration that we have available to us when we come to know Jesus. When you look at the life change and just the peace and the closeness with God that we can have, things that we never could have had without that. when life hits, you got to stop and you got to pray. And you got to get your bearing. And then after that, you have to adjust your life's flight path to get on that line and then stay on that line. It's great to pray, but if you don't do anything after with it, then what was the point? So now, why did I actually tell you that story in the very beginning? You remember that? The real reason I told you that story was because, if you remember, when did I pray? At the end. I tried to crank it. I tried the hot start, the cold start, the flooded start, had the mechanic do this, we did all these different things. And then at the very end, I'm standing there, and I had no other ideas at that point. I'm like, man, I really need to get this plane started because I got to work on Monday, and it's Saturday at like noon already, and I got to fly, and it's not a very fast plane. And I got to get going. Okay, let me pray and see if that works.
Last resort.
Yeah, it was my last resort. Now, God is a good God. He's a loving God. He's not going to punish me because, you prayed last, and no, not starting for you. No, the plane started, and it shouldn't have started. That thing was barely, especially after how many times you try to crank it, it's just getting weak. The battery's getting weaker and weaker. And it did start. Another time, Steve McCluskey's car broke down. It wouldn't start outside of AT&T, right down the road here by Target. And he called me because he knew I had cables. And we're trying to crank it, and it won't start. And it won't start, and it won't start. And finally, I remember I was almost like, I was like, man, I want to pray for this. But I felt embarrassed to pray over this engine. Steve McCluskey was my first friend in Flagler.
Yeah.
I've been walking with him as a Christian, like literally since day one of me being, at this church. We've been through thick and thin. We've prayed together. We've prayed. We've done, and I was like embarrassed to pray in front of him. I'm like, what? Looking back, it's like, man, what in the world? Now there are times I do pray first. I'm not going to say I don't. I was getting these like random headaches that would hit there, very piercing. I would instantly go, no, in the name of Jesus, I reject this. I will not have this headache. It will be gone from me. And literally by that time, it would be gone.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying, I only ever pray last. And then we found out it was a knot right there, and they worked it out, and it was fine. So I'm not sitting here saying that I've only ever prayed last.
Right.
But I tell you this because it's a continual process to teach ourselves to pray first, or to do anything. Like most things in life, that don't come naturally, they're very uncomfortable and awkward when you first start doing them. And it really takes an active effort to learn it. If you play a musical instrument or even driving, remember when you first learned to drive, I'll be nice to Chelsea. I couldn't help it. But, all these things that when you're first learning, they're awkward, they're hard to do. Guess what? After a while, after just with enough repetition, guess what? You figure out how to do them.
Yeah.
Even if you don't necessarily like doing it all the time, you can do it, and you can do it pretty well. And really, that's what it comes down to this is, man, we just got to get in the habit of praying first. Now, I'm not trying to get to a religious mindset here. I'm not trying to tell you, how long, how loud, whether it has to be out loud, any of that sort of stuff on how to pray. And I'm not even here necessarily going to tell you that you absolutely have to pray first every time. I've had times in my life where I couldn't pray first. I needed my brain doing other things to handle what was in front of me. And then afterwards, I was more like a prayer of thanksgiving. So I'm not trying to be in any sort of religious mindset at all. Sometimes it's both at the same time. There have been times where things have happened, and as I'm doing things, at the same time I'm praying. And it just kind of happens. But that's why we have to be actively aware of the Spirit. And you have to, I once heard the Spirit described as a dove that sits on your shoulder. And doves spook easily. So you kind of, as you walk through life, you just have to constantly, if you don't want that dove to fly away, you have to what? You have to just kind of keep checking on him constantly. See where he's getting a little antsy. All right, let me just stop here. All right, he's calm. Now I can go. You have to constantly be in tune with God's Spirit to see exactly what you should be doing. Because it's not a formula. And also, one thing I want to make sure you take away over this is he's not going to bash you if you do it wrong, if you don't pray first. Look, I didn't pray first twice over 2 engines, and they both started right after we prayed. God's not like, no, you screwed up, you're done. He's a loving father. And most of you have kids, think of your kid. You want them to succeed, and even if you told them, to clean the room 30,000 times when they sorry, Mom and Dad, when they finally clean the room, aren't you kind of happy they did?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you may need to teach them about first-time obedience, but still, you're happy that they did. It's not perfection he's interested in. It's just our hearts.
Yeah.
It's just our hearts. Now, I've heard it said multiple times that if something isn't practical, it isn't spiritual. And it's always rung really true with me. You can sit here and have all this theory and theory and theory and theory and theory all you want, but at the end of the day, you have to kind of get out and be able to do something with it. And all this that I've just told you, all the CDIs and radials and bearings and all that mess, honestly, if you forget all of that, that's fine, as long as it makes the point stick of, all I remember is John said, I got to pray first. There's a line, and I just got to get on the line. If you can, that's why we use parables. It, makes the illustration.
Right.
If you, I just want to impart that to you, so that way when you're out there, and you're in the, not in the theoretical, but in the practical side of life, when you're out there doing it, that you know what to do. Because the great thing about this is it's very simple. You just have to pray. Pray first, whether it's when life hits you and, all of a sudden someone is sick or there's an accident, or whether it's, trying to figure out what job you're supposed to buy, what job you're supposed to have, or house you're supposed to be, whatever decision it is, the little things. God, what should I be doing right here? Let's not make this complicated. I said, Father, what do I do? And oftentimes you'll know by the peace that you have. And if you're ever unsure, my dad actually taught me this as a police officer. He says, when you're in a situation, you have to do something. You can't just sit there. He's like, and you'll find out, if you don't know what to do, just do something. You'll figure out pretty soon if it's the right or wrong decision.
Yeah.
So if you're ever sitting there and you're like, I don't know which job I should accept. You know what? Start writing out your, email as an acceptance letter to them. And as you're typing that email out, just pick one. And as you're typing it out, see what it feels like. See if you have a peace about that inside. And if you do, okay. If you don't, well, let me save that one as a draft and let's work on this other one.
Yeah.
So if you're ever not sure, try something, see what happens. Just don't hurt yourself. Don't should I jump off the bridge or not? Not those decisions. So what I'm hoping will happen to all of you and myself is that we somehow get a little uncomfortable this week as we're in a situation where God's calling us to pray first, and it's going to be outside of our comfort zone. Because if we don't get outside of our comfort zone, we'll never get comfortable doing something new. And it's not always fun, but it's necessary. And I'm hoping that each of these is specific to every person, because we're all in different places. Some people can stand up here and talk till they're blue in the face. If you give me the right reasons, I can talk for hours in front of people. Other people aren't going to do it. They don't want to pray out loud. So it's, God knows where you're at, and He'll meet you there.
Yes, you will.
And some of you, I feel like, might even have a specific situation in your mind right now that you're already sitting there going, man, I need to pray about that. I know I've been wrestling with it, and look, I need to go ahead and pray first before I make these decisions. But whatever it is, when it does hit, you remember, get your bearing to figure out, God, what do you want me to do here? How do I do this? Who do I call? What's going on? And then we have to get on the line, but then we got to stay on the line. However that looks in your, in your example. But the whole purpose of this is so that at some point, as we've gone through God's path, we can radiate from it. And we can be out, and people are like, wow, that's just amazing what's going on in their life right now. And they talk to you about it, you can say, well, yeah, it's because of these things. Now I'm able to do this, and I'm able to be effective in whatever it is. So I'm going to close this out in prayer here in a second. And if you have a situation in mind, go ahead and pray. This is a great time to do it. If not, then hey, pray for those that do need it. Pray for yourself. Pray for something. And honestly, some people in this room, before we can really do all this, our bearing needs to be to Jesus. If you've never had your bearing set to Jesus, and you've never gotten to Him, and you've never had that moment with Jesus, and now all of a sudden, okay, salvation's behind me, I'm able to radiate outward, this is a good time for that. And if you're sitting there going like, man, I've never, had an experience with Jesus, come talk to me after. Come talk to Gina or Maria or Ben or Sandy, and let's talk about it. Let's make sure you're understanding. Let's work on it. Let's work with this. And kind of random, but that second song we sang, and it really, I love the line in that song. It says, I had to write it on my phone. It says, if you left talking, Jesus, if you left the grave behind, then so will I. Because Jesus left the grave behind. It's in his past. He's radiating from it. It's way back here. And if you've never done that, this is your time. Because he did it, and he's made it available to us. And also, I'm not sure how this ties in, but, if there's any part of this message that's spoken to you in relation to forgiveness and forgiving other people, maybe God's saying, look, that's the line you need to get on, is that line of forgiveness. You need to forgive whoever it is that's hurt you. Or you need to go seek forgiveness from people that you've hurt, or whatever it is. If that's on your heart, then I want you to come up here when we're done and let's pray over that. We'll have the prayer team come up and let's address that. Because that's an important line. That's a line that can change your life, holding that unforgiveness. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your love. Thank you for your knowledge and for your wisdom. Father, thank you for, giving me these examples, but I thank you that it's not my explanations, but it's your Spirit working through the people's hearts and minds and souls and spirits. Father, I thank you for the wisdom that you give us when we come to you and we pray first. I thank you for the bearings that you give us, and I thank you for the way we can radiate out after you've brought us to the point you need to. Father, I thank you for how you've forgiven us. I thank you for how you took everything we've ever done and you just wiped it away. And you put that back there with it all. And you said, okay, go forward. Father, thank you for the people in this room that haven't had that experience with you. I thank you because they have the opportunity to do that with you every day, every second of this life. They can turn to you and have all that stuff be in the past, and they can radiate from it. I'm asking God, what do I do at this exact moment in time? And I feel like he's saying, we need to stand up, we need to sing this song. He says, because there are people in this room that are ready to surrender to me, and I can't wait till they do so I can love them. So team, if we could have, you're already up. Team, if we could sing this song, that would be great, and then Jeremy can take it from there.